I think we finally now have that primordial stew of devices in the hands of 3.5 billion people that are constantly connected, much better and more flexible infrastructure in the cloud that can understand and in real time compute kind of what they should be offering you. I think we will all find it a little bit creepy at the start, right? It's going to be predictive. You're going to get suggestions and you're going to be like, wow, that really is right on, but it's a little too close to home.
You're listening to the Skift Podcast. What you've just heard is a clip of Brad Gerstner, founder, chairman, and CEO of Altimeter Capital, speaking at Skift Global Forum 2016 on a panel that was correctly billed as a gathering of legends of online travel. Also on the panel were Rich Barton, co-founder and, at the time, executive chairman of Zillow Group. He is currently CEO. Dara Khosrowshahi, then the president and CEO of Expedia. He is currently the CEO of Uber. Jay Walker, founder of Priceline and CEO of Upside. And moderator Dennis Schaal, Skift's founding and executive editor, who earlier that year had released the definitive oral history of online travel, an authoritative account of the rise of the online travel agency. As we look ahead to the landmark 10th Skift Global Forum happening this September in New York City, today we take a look, or listen, back at this session from nearly 7 years ago to assess just how prescient these esteemed speakers were as they discussed the future of online travel as seen from that faraway time, still 3+ years before the onset of the global COVID pandemic, and 6+ years from the broad release of ChatGPT, the widely used generative AI tool that has sparked imaginations throughout the world and travel industry. As the panelists in this session point out, many of their predictions have been around since the 1990s .com boom and before. So what makes now the moment? Brad Gerstner's comment, among others you'll hear in this session, give us some insight into the answer. And we can be certain that this question will loom large at the coming Skift Global Forum as our sessions look to tackle the theme of connection in the age of AI. If you enjoyed this discussion, you can watch other Skift Forum sessions in their entirety on Skift's official YouTube channel. And of course, you can visit live.skift.com for more information on how to attend this year's forum for yourself. Enjoy the conversation.
So I wrote a 65,000 words oral history of online travel, and all these guys participated. Jay founded Priceline.com. Brad was co-CEO of the National Leisure Group. Dara is the CEO of Expedia and acquired Expedia when he was at IAC or USA Networks. And Rich founded Expedia out of Microsoft. I kind of feel like this is the New York Giants and it's the Bill Parcells coaching tree. You have Bill Belichick in Boston, you have Sean Payton in New Orleans, you have Romy and Cornell in Houston. So Rich started it all, Dara acquired you, Brad was on the board of Orbitz, which Expedia owns. Jay is the very successful odd man out. Because he founded Priceline.com, which laid the groundwork for what is today a $71 billion company. So let's talk, and also in the audience is Terry Jones, who had a role to play in Travelocity founder in the whole thing. So there's so many lessons about risk-taking and interesting stories. So let's start with it. Rich, to belabor the football analogy, online travel is a contact sport, isn't it? And I was thinking in particular about, you founded Expedia out of Microsoft. You got the ball rolling. You told Steve Ballmer that you needed $100 million to market the thing, and he either laughed you out of the office or threw you out of the office. I'm not sure which.
He pounded the table. Yep.
And then you tell us what happened when you took Expedia on its IPO roadshow.
All right, so you want the mob story.
Yeah.
You know, that was an incredible piece you wrote, Dennis.
Thank you.
I don't know that everybody made it through the whole thing, but we should give it up. I learned, I was like laughing and crying, and I learned a bunch of stuff. I don't know about you guys, but I learned a whole lot about our industry, my industry, from reading that. So thank you. I guess I start by saying the first online travel conference that I went to, I spoke at, it was in a Red Lion. And there were only like 30 or 40 people. And this is incredible what's happened to this industry. This has become a real business, you know? Congratulations to all you guys, really. Anyway, when I went to Ballmer, I had worked for Steve Ballmer. I was running Expedia inside of Microsoft. This is in 1999. It started in 1996. And Steve Ballmer was my boss, and everything was going public in 1999. If you weren't around then, it's pretty difficult to grok just how frothy the IPO market was and the venture capital market was. There were literally things like pets.com going public. Anything could go public. And I went to Steve and I said, you're well aware what's going on here in the public markets. You need to give me $100 million so that I can turn Expedia into a household brand name. I said, I need to be on TV. We can't just rely on Microsoft's portal, MSN, to guide traffic to us. And he laughed at me, said, we don't do that at Microsoft. We don't spend that money. And I said, well, let me go public because I can get the money from the public markets. And to his credit and to Bill Gates' credit and Greg Maffei's credit, they let me do that. So we took 150 people in 1999, carved it out of Microsoft, and went public. Now, the story that Dennis is referring to is that this is a really hard time of my life. I'm 32 years old or 31. My CFO is a year older than I am. We're kids. We're on a IPO roadshow going around to 50 different cities in over 3 weeks and doing our dog and pony show. And early in the third week of this, I get a call from, I don't even know who it was. I don't think it was Hafner. I think it was that other guy at BCG. Some consultant at BCG summoning me and my roadshow team to a conference room in Chicago, I think, or maybe it was New York. Chicago would be fitting. And when I showed up, what I was met with was a layer of lawyers and consultants behind of which was the airlines, the executives from each of the major airlines. The least successful oligopoly in the history of business, at least at the time. I guess the airline business has gotten better business.
Things are getting better.
They learned how to charge fees from us. Okay, anyway. So these airline executives were back there and not really allowed to speak much because they didn't want to get foul of antitrust. But what the consultant did, what Hafner and this other guy did, was they put a contract. They sat me down and they put a contract, a very short contract, and they said, sign this, or we're going to release this press release this afternoon. And the sign this was give away a huge chunk of my company for nothing. Like half, I think, is what they wanted. I don't really remember the terms. Maybe Hafner could tell you. And the press release was largest airlines in the world band together to create a competitor to Expedia and Travelocity.
Orbitz. We're going to launch Orbitz.
What was it, Travelocity?
T2.
T2 is supposedly meant Travelocity Terminator, but they disclaimed any
subtle.
veracity.
Very subtle.
Anyway, so it was like a mob hit. It was like I'm in the middle of this really important, exciting time in my life. I'm on top of the world. I'm exhausted, and I felt like, it was Capone back there with the bat. And they made the offer I couldn't refuse. I literally couldn't refuse it, but we got together as a team, and we held hands, and we said, if we do this, Expedia will never become great because we will be hamstrung by this highly disorganized oligopoly that doesn't really even want this channel to exist.
Another guy who...
So we said no.
So can I tell an airline story?
We said no.
Sure, go ahead.
This is unplanned, but an airline CEO who won't be named, I joined Expedia, and I'm like, well, we should meet some of our partners. And I called up the office of a CEO and said, my name's Dara Khosrowshahi, I work at Expedia, and we're probably 5% of the airline volume at the time. We weren't so small. We'll love to come and meet, come down. And they said, oh, the executive's not available. I said, well, how about this week? Not available, but I'll get back to you. The office got back to me, said, well, he's not available in these 3 weeks. So I told his assistant, how about this? can you look at his calendar for the next year? And I will come down any day. I'll fly to see you any day that you want me to come. Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying where.
Not across.
I'm not saying where. So his office calls me back and says, Mr. Such and Such is busy for the next year.
Full year.
There you go.
That is great.
Another guy who made room in his schedule for Jay Walker was Bob Crandall at American Airlines. And Jay was around 1997 or 1998. Travelocity had launched, Expedia had launched. You came up with the idea for name your own price for airline tickets. Rich later said it was a gimmick, but maybe tried to copy it, I'm not sure. But at any rate, tell us how the airlines welcomed you with open arms when you launched Priceline.com.
Well, Bob Crandall was the tough guy. You know, he had the reputation that he really deserved as the last of the great cowboys in the airline industry. And so we had been working with all the airlines, and talking to every one of them. And we had some real supporters at American said, this is clever. This is a smart revenue management tool. We could use this, but we're going to have to get Bob to approve it. You'll have to come down here and present to Bob because he makes all the key decisions. I said, great. I walk into a conference room. It's about the size of this stage. It's enormous. And there's like 40 chairs. It's got its own zip code. And there's all these executives and Bob Crandall at the front. And he's like this and goes, I hear you're from the internet. What the hell?
Which one?
I hear you're from the internet. Okay. They did not like the internet at American Airlines. Okay. So I said, well, not exactly, but let's go on. What do you got? Okay. And I lay out the idea behind collecting demand at all points in the price curve, creating a product, and I explain it very briefly. And he goes, I don't like that. I don't like it at all, he said. And I explained a little bit more why he should like it, why it was a really good tool. It was a super leisure customer, a completely different kind of customer. They were ones who weren't traveling on buses, literally any time of the day, any airline, seniors, kids, people who would not normally buy a specified product. And he looked and he said, Jay, we would be better off if you were hit by a truck. And I remembered I was like, 35. And I said,
you were a little older, Jay.
40, whatever. I said,
the rivalry
is that
continues.
Personal? He goes, oh, that's not personal. He just basically hated the internet and viewed Priceline as the harbinger. And I said, hitting me with a truck isn't going to hold back the internet. He goes, slow it down. That's how it was.
Okay.
American pulled out.
And how much money did you make Delta?
Yeah.
Delta made $1 billion, and American Airlines called 3 other airlines the day we launched, and all 3 of them simultaneously pulled out.
But explain,
Literally.
Delta made that much money
$1
because
billion.
Which
got
was
warranted.
larger than the market cap of the whole airline industry.
At the time, yes. Delta made $1 billion
I don't think that's a joke.
working.
Because they got
They got warrants and worked with and tied directly into the price.
But Brad, tell us why things are different now.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Brad.
completely improved. I know.
I will say that the big conference rooms haven't changed.
Yeah.
Giant.
Brad.
They don't smell like cigarettes anymore, though.
True.
Brad was co-CEO of National Leisure Group.
Bit player.
No.
Was
huge.
the biggest vacation packager and cruise seller in online travel. Were you selling to Priceline or Expedia, Orbitz? Were you selling to all those guys at the time?
Well, first, truthfully, there's some visionaries up here. I certainly wasn't one of them. I was graduating from business school in 2000. I'd met up with a couple mavericks in Boston who are also part of your great piece, Joel Cutler and David Fialco. And they had invested early in the travel business, made some money on a business called Last Minute Travel, which was just offline direct marketing. And I think that a lot of early internet plays were either CD-ROMs like Rich was hawking, or 1-800 numbers like Hotel Reservations Network was dealing with. And they had this idea of buying an offline cruise seller owned by America West Holdings and building the first cruise and vacation package booking engines.
Who did?
It was a collection of people. Ron Fisher at SoftBank, Joel Cutler, myself, Paul Reeder was involved in that, Aaron Gall, who now runs Silver Rail, who I know is speaking here. And that's what we did. And it was run by this incredible guy who shouldn't go without noting, a guy named Greg Davis, who is a dear friend to all of us, who was tragically killed in 2001, right about the time all of this was going on. And it wouldn't, like my part in the story would not be here.
In a bicycle accident.
And so, but the idea was, let's build these booking engines, and then let's go license them to Expedia, to Travelocity, to Orbitz, to Priceline, and that's exactly what we did. We closed on that transaction to buy the company.
Wait, before you closed, weren't you negotiating both with IHG and Expedia at the same time?
Yeah, so we bought these two guys. Yeah, we bought the company in May of 2000, and by that fall, to show you how fast things were moving, we were in conversations with Rich to sell the business to Expedia, and we were in conversations with Dara to sell the business to USA Networks. And ironically, I think we played a role in USA Networks kind of discovering Expedia. Because they asked us who we thought was the best out of all the players in travel. And so we said, we think these guys at Expedia are running away with it. No offense, Terry.
Sometimes it's better to keep your mouth closed, right?
And, but truthfully, so we ended up closing on that transaction. We announced it in Hollywood, I don't know, May or June of 2001. Rich and I were in the back of a limo on the way to Barry Diller's house. In Beverly Hills, and Rich looks over at me and he's like, how did we end up here? And literally, so last story about that, but the next day, or shortly thereafter, Barry collects all the CEOs of all of his portfolio companies, from Ticketmaster to USA Networks, Home Shopping Network, Hotels.com, the newly acquired Expedia, myself, National Leisure Group, and we're all sitting in a room, if you remember at the time. People were worried about the economy, and so he wanted to have a discussion about whether or not his executives should be engaged in first-class travel, first-class air tickets. Do you remember this?
No.
And so Barry says, you have Bob Diener and Dave Lippman from Hotels.com. They said, you're crazy. We print on both sides of the sheet of paper.
We ride our bikes from city to city.
Bikes. Like, you should never, ever fly first class. And then, of course, you have these Hollywood moguls who are like, are you kidding me? How can we not go first class? And I remember Rich saying, well, you did just buy Expedia, and we saw a lot of air tickets, and we could probably get you guys some pretty good deals on first class tickets. And it ended by, one of the Hollywood executives asking Barry if it meant that he was going to ride in the back of his private airplane instead of the front.
But to close the loop, quickly, September 11th happened, and then the deal never went through.
Yeah. So I remember September 11th, Rich called me and said, have your lawyer, and I said, Rich, I can't believe what's going on. My head was, I was focused on other things at the time. My girlfriend lived in New York, and Rich said, have the lawyers look at your material adverse change clause. And sure enough,
that's a part of a contract where if some great big externality happens that changes, materially the business that's being purchased, then the purchaser generally will have an out. Which is topical right now because I'm sure, I haven't read it, but I'll bet Verizon's Mac clause for buying Yahoo, I'll bet the lawyers are poring over that thing right now.
Speaking of buying Yahoo, Dara, could you tell us the story of how you stole TripAdvisor from Yahoo, basically?
I don't know.
And meeting Steve Kaufer for the first time, whatever you want to say.
I don't know about stealing it, but we had actually looked at TripAdvisor. The Expedia gang had looked at TripAdvisor, and one of the lessons here is that they didn't like TripAdvisor because TripAdvisor was about content and overly dependent on Google, and so the Expedia said no to that business. And the lesson is people like businesses, and I think you've got to train yourself to disassociate yourself with the like of self in order to take jumps into new business models, et cetera. We failed to do that in that case. Expedia said no. Yahoo came in to buy TripAdvisor and had a deal. I went to Barry because Expedia and IAC were separate. IAC was a parent company of Expedia's, but didn't own 100%. This Yahoo deal took forever, and nothing was happening. And I told Barry, our chairman, I said, you know what? I think we really screwed up here. This TripAdvisor, it's not just SEO. It's a great company. It's got great, content, UGC, et cetera. He said, well, then call him up, see what's going on. So I call up the banker, who's on the board of Priceline now, as to, hey, what's going on? What's going on with this Yahoo deal? And she goes, she says, I can't talk to you. Call me on Thursday. Click. So there was an exclusive period that was ending on Thursday. Call her up on Thursday. She said, Yahoo's messing around here with due diligence, et cetera. Steve still wants to sell. He had gone through a tragedy in his life, and he wanted to, he had his own personal reasons why he wants to sell. So I flew up to Boston, had dinner with Steve and Langley, who are the founders, and we had a deal done in a week and a half. And it turned out to be a great deal. Thank God for Steve.
To take the story forward a little bit, given all your experiences, a hell of a lot of experiences, where do you think online travel is today? Is it mature? What are the trends? Is do-it-yourself done? We're seeing chatbots and artificial intelligence. What are some of the things you point to today in terms of where online travel is going?
I'll start, I guess. My first demo of the Expedia concept back at Microsoft was in front of the then consumer division, and I was demonstrating a concept, and I did it in a social user interface. Okay, SUI. This was. Anybody remember Microsoft Bob?
Yep.
Of course not.
Is that the paperclip? Or?
This one was a parrot. And Bob, the parrot, I did this whole demo, and I wasn't typing like you were talking about, this vertical structure, and we're too filter and fields oriented in our search. I wasn't typing. I was talking to Bob. Okay, it was all mocked up. It didn't work. And Bob, this parrot, was we used to call them smart agents. All right, we used to call these software bots smart agents. Right. Now, this was way, way, way ahead of time, but this was in 1995, okay? And in 1995, we already knew that the way we wanted to interact with a computer ultimately was via voice, using natural language, and that travel was a obvious vertical industry that would benefit from this. It's hard for me to believe that we're sitting here 20 plus years later, and that's still a dream. Like, that's still a dream. But Siri and Echo, Amazon's Alexa and Google's thing, they're showing the way that I think in the next 10 years, I'm really excited that there will be a major user interface change with the way your consumers are planning and traveling.
Even the term is an anachronism. There's no online, offline as you move forward. This whole idea of online travel is really the end of the age of automation that started with green screens on travel agents. And Dara was talking about it earlier. It was the technology stack and the database structures are all anachronisms from a prior age that have been souped up with, it's a Model T Ford with a Ferrari engine in it, but it's still a car. And what's going to change? It's going to change massively, and it's going to change quickly. It's been slow, I agree, in the gestation, but there's no question that, the phone and mobile completely changes everything. Then you add augmented reality, you add AI, you add chatbots, you add continuous connectivity, and this notion of online travel is going to seem like a dial phone. You see phones used to have these dials on them? Okay. And that was called a dial tone. Yeah, that's all gone. So,
to be fair, Jay, we've been saying that for a long time.
yeah, but look at the speed at which
so what's different? What's different
is the compounding has caught up. I mean,
Right.
a compounded growth rate of 15% a year before the lily pond is covered, the first, 5 generations of compounding don't look like much. But then when that thing starts to really pick up speed, baby, that rocket takes off.
We also went through this post-traumatic stress of the bubble bursting in 2000. Like these conversations were spot on in 99 and 2000. We just got so damn excited. We got 10 years ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, exactly right.
And I've been, thinking about this, the first 15 years in this industry, I mean, there's $130 billion of enterprise value among the distributors, in online travel today. I think that'll be double or triple 5 or 10 years from now. But the first 15 years was really just about wiring up the world's
Automation.
hotels.
It was about automation.
Yeah. And now we sit here, and if you say, where's all the value created? I'd say, well, we're just going to sell a hell lot more hotels. We're going to go from 15% penetration to 30% penetration of the world's hotel rooms. Secondly, it's not just about hotels anymore. It's about every source of accommodation and everything you do in destination, which is finally coming to fruition. And then the third thing, as Rich has pointed out, I think the interaction, the way in which you interact, we have this notion of power users who now are always connected via a supercomputer, whether it's on their ear, on their eyes, in their pocket, and they're just going to be able to buy a lot more and do a lot better tailored travel.
By the way, I do think also, not just on the accommodation space, how you get there.
Sure.
Yeah. The only part of how you get there that's been wired up has been planes, because they've got real scale, and now Uber obviously is wiring up cars. But there are a lot of other modes of transport. Rail, for example, we're working with Silver Rail. We're really optimistic. Rail should be wired up in a great, smooth, easy
Food?
to use.
What about food? It's all going to wire up.
I was going to say bus as well, but there is still a lot of wiring up to do.
Automation.
There's still a lot of upside left in the wiring up, and sometimes you have to hit a wall before you start innovating around how you interact with these, with travel, et cetera. But there's still a lot of growth left for us.
Let me chip in one more, just because it's mind-boggling to me. Travel is passion. We're passionate about travel. We love to shop for travel. We love to travel, adventure, explore, and we do that with other people.
Yeah.
And we do that to meet other people as well. We do that in groups. We do that in families. And it's mind-boggling to me today how unsocial our travel planning and movement tools are. And I'll point out, I don't know if Sean's here, but there's a new really big kid, like a 200-pound 5-year-old in the audience today. That is Sean Ryan of Facebook. I would argue that Facebook is probably the most important traveler sharing community that exists. Maybe Instagram, if you count Instagram as well. Sean, are you here? Raise your hand. People can talk to you. There he is in the back, just like in school. These guys are interested. Facebook is very interested, and I think there's a ton of upside as all of us begin to think about how we can make the experience much more social.
What about the human element in travel planning?
Rich talked about the smart bot. I mean, it is ironic that we're sitting here and you listen to Bezos talk about Alexa and as though it's brand new. And this has been 20 years in the making. We used to say 15 years ago, what are we trying to build? What we're trying to build is the intelligence to replicate the best agent who knows you really well. But this idea, I think there's been recently some debate about this again. Lola and the stuff Paul English is doing has kind of kicked some of this up. This idea that we're going to have we're going backwards instead of forwards, that we're going to re-engage all these human offline agents to do this, I think is unlikely, simply because I think the power of the big data, he knows my preferences, they know how often I book, they own my calendar, their ability to do predictive and suggestive search is incredible, and by the way, they employ a lot of travel agents. Mm-hmm. And so the ability for them to intercept a power user and be able to do that kind of on the fly, but really layered with tons of data. I think that startups can play a role here, but my sense is that when you start thinking about machine learning, big data, AI, whatever you want to call it, it really inures the advantages to the largest player because they have all the data, right? Elon Musk is only worried about Google when it comes to AI, and there's a reason for that. They have all the data.
And you need giant data sets in order for AI to work.
Right.
You know, the other factor that I think is new as it relates to these messaging platforms, a lot of people associate with text and the interaction, but the key with these messaging platforms is identity. And with these messaging platforms, you can identify who the user is. I actually think that the first order use case is not going to be on research because I think that's harder to crack. It's going to be on service. But for me to be able to message Expedia on Messenger or text whoever knows, you know, cancel my hotel booking in New York next week is a much more delightful experience than calling or even my getting on the website, et cetera. So I think those kinds of simple use cases are going to first get
So you could
fixed.
see incorporating some of those things for your own customer service.
First on service. We're going to take it on the service side. I think the planning experience in building AI for that has a real challenge because you're going to get a lot of null results. The AI isn't going to understand what you say, and you get 2 or 3 of those and it's thrown away. So I think you start with small use cases and then you expand from there.
I think
Personal
leisure
opinion.
travel is essentially a social experience, and so it's human. I think human group booking, group buying, group comparison. Look at all the work that goes on Facebook before you begin a process. Where are we going? What are we doing when we're there? It's a family event. It's a group of guys or friends. So it's leisure travel is a social game. Therefore, the AI function is only in the support role of a social game. Business travel is a very different, completely different set of problems, and there AI might be able to be much more narrow and focused because a business traveler is doing something more repetitive, more predictive, and in many ways more commercially driven from a result than leisure travel, which is much more discovery-based, opportunistic.
And more infrequent. It's
much
it's
more-
harder to find patterns in infrequent data sets.
much more.
So I do agree
Yeah.
on the business side.
And the business guys are all wired up, and women too, are expecting service levels of extreme high quality. They're expecting stuff that the leisure traveler isn't necessarily expecting. Leisure traveler is probably going to be a lot more price driven for $10 or $20 versus the business traveler who says, look, but my time's worth real money here. What are we going to do to make sure this all works?
Brad, you mentioned big data and personalization. I was walking by the Empire Hotel the other morning, and it's 7:30 in the morning, and I get a notification from TripAdvisor about, do I want to try the restaurants nearby? You know, 7:30 in the morning, I wasn't looking for restaurants. So is personalization, is that a reality? Are we making progress, or what's the story there?
I think it's like some of the other things we've referenced. You know, these things seem to have, I remember in 2000, everybody was talking about mobile. And then we all started saying about 2003, like, stop talking about it. It's not happening the way we thought it was going to happen. And then we all woke up one day in 2009 and we're like, holy, this just happened. And so I think it's similar when it comes to personalization. I mean, we've heard about personalization for a decade, and still when I run a hotel search on hotels.com for New York City, I get 500 hotels as though I'm going to stay at a 2-star in Brooklyn when I'm, coming here to speak. And so, like, this is all it's all been happening, but I think we finally now have that primordial stew of devices in the hands of 3.5 billion people that are constantly connected, much better and more flexible infrastructure in the cloud that can understand and in real time compute, kind of what they should be offering you. I think we will all find it a little bit creepy at the start, right? It's going to be predictive. You're going to get suggestions and you're going to be like, wow, that really is right on, but it's a little too close to home. And so, but I think we'll all quickly get used to it. I think millennials will love it. It won't strike them as unusual in the least. And, and I think a lot of these ideas, just as they've recycled, Rich started or was involved with myself in a business called Trover, which was the social planning around travel. I'm certain that this is going to happen, right? And it may be Facebook, or it may be Facebook partnering with Expedia. It will happen. Most great ideas were thought of before.
Well, guys, I think we pretty much covered it. There's nothing more to say.
Thanks, Dan.
So thank you very much.
This has been the Skift Podcast. Thank you for listening.